Hi everybody, my name is Walter Rowe. You've probably seen some of my other videos. I'm a Capture One affiliate, and today we're going to talk about the HDR Merge tool in the new Capture One 22 released December 9th, 2021. Capture One recommends for HDR Merge that you capture one frame properly exposed and two more frames at plus and minus 2 stops from properly exposed. I went out and captured a 9-frame sequence in 2/3 stops difference between each frame, and I wanted to test whether merging more frames, fewer frames, frames that capture more than 2 stops of dynamic range produce any better results, or if the guidance from Capture One of properly exposed frame and 2 frames plus or minus 2 stops produces the same result, better, worse results. Does the guidance really echo the results? Or I should say, do the results echo the guidance? So today we're going to take a look at that. Here we have the result of an HDR merge. This is 3 frames, 2 stops, plus and minus in the product. Now here's the original 9 frames that were taken. This was a properly exposed frame. It's actually a little underexposed, but this was the center image, if you will, in terms of exposure. And then there's 1 through 4 frames that are underexposed. This is minus 2/3, minus 1 1/3, minus 2, and then minus 2 2/3. And then here we have the 4 overexposed frames. We have plus 2/3, plus 1 1/3, plus 2 stops, and then plus 2 2/3 stops. And so I've selected all 9 of those frames, and I right-clicked and I selected HDR Merge, and I chose an auto align. I did not choose auto adjust. I made my own adjustments. I'm not going to go through the actual merging process. That takes quite a few minutes, and I don't want to spend your time just sitting there spinning wheels while we do that. Here's the result of the merge. It looks pretty good. I'll turn on exposure warnings. You can see even after the merge, I have high dynamic range set at minus 80 for highlight and minus 80 for white. And we still have a couple places where we're getting an exposure warning. Now I set my exposure warning at 253. If I set it all the way to 255 and maybe set my shadow warning to 0, we actually still get a little bit of a warning. You can see if I mouse over there that the readouts across the top, the red is clipped. And if we look at the over here in the histogram, we see it is kind of coming right up to the edge. So right in there, there is clipping. Here's the readout. Here's clipping in the red channel at 255 in that one little area. Let me bring this back to 253. This is where I normally put things. Plus 2 for shadow and 253 for highlights. Okay, so that's 9 frames merged. You can just kind of see the pattern of the histogram. And one thing that I did as I created my different merges was I tried to produce a similar histogram with each set of frames. What I do want to show you is the before. If I do the before and show you the exposure warning, you can see as I mouse over, here's 255, 255, 255, so many places around the sky, really blown out. And if I hit F2 to do a new variant that has no adjustments applied, you can see how exposed to the right this is. I mean, everything is clipping on the highlight side, completely blown out. I'm going to delete that variant. I don't need it. So now let's take a look at some different options I did for 5 frames. You can see there's a 5A, a 5B, and a 5C here. These are all selecting 5 frames, but I chose a different set of 5 frames for each one of these. For the 5A, I chose the proper exposure. I chose every other frame just like this, for the 5 frames. So this one gets the -2 stops as the most underexposed frame, but it gets the +2 2/3 stops as the most overexposed frame. So I selected those, and that gave me this product here. This is my 5A. So that's 5 frames merged together. If I turn off exposure warning, you can see, you can see this histogram. Here's the 9 frame. Oops. Here's the 9 frame, and here's the 5 frame. In fact, I'll just bring these up here together like this. So as I switch between them, you can see the histogram is almost identical. You see the blue channel is probably clipped a little more in the 9 frame and not so much in the 5 frame. So the result of that is that to me, using 9 frames, let's go to exposure warning. We got the same little exposure warning after applying our adjustments. What is also interesting, if we look at the adjustments I applied, in the 9 frame image, I had to apply a -0.85 under exposure to get to the same histogram that I got with the 5 frame with a +0.2 exposure. So there's a full stop of difference in the product of the HDR merge. And in fact, you can just even look along here. As I mouse over, these are very bright little area right in here. And over here, it's just a little less bright. Not much, but just a tad. Like there just might be a little more recovery here, which makes a lot of sense. I actually had to pull this down by 0.85, and I had to add +0.2 for the 5 frame. So if I do let me go back and do the before and afters here. Here you can see before and after comparing, I'm sorry, the before of both frames. The right side frame is no adjustments applied. You can see all these areas where it's blown out. The left side frame is where only 5 images were selected instead of 9 images. And here you can see there's actually less exposure warning in the before picture with just 5 frames. So 5 frames actually produced a better result than 9 frames. So right there, Capture One telling us more frames isn't necessarily better. There seems to be some evidence right here. Let's go and pick 5B. So 5B, I chose 5 frames, but instead of choosing the most overexposed frame and every other one, I chose the most underexposed frame and every other one. So I go from -2 2/3 stop to +2/3 stop. That's what gives us 5B. So in 5B, and here I'll bring up 5B and 5A together. This is before for both of them, and you can see the before is almost identical. In the before on 5A, we have from -2 stops to +2 2/3 stops. In 5B, we have -2 2/3 stops to +2 stops. So we have less overexposure, more underexposure. But we get effectively the same result in the HDR merge. And if I do the after, you can see the little bits of exposure warning even with the recovery. You can see I have the same adjustments applied to both. You can see that the histogram is almost identical in both. And so 5 frames, doesn't matter which set of 5 frames I select, I get pretty much the same result. So then I said, well, let me try the right frame, the properly exposed frame. Let me try the 2 adjacent frames, the minus and plus 2/3 of a stop, and then let me try the minus and plus 1 1/3 stop. and merge those together. And actually this goes from, it goes to minus 2 stops. I'm sorry. So there's minus 2 stops, minus a third of a stop, 2/3 of a stop, and plus 2/3 of a stop, and then plus 2 stops, along with the center exposure frame. So I merged those together, and that gave me 5C. 5C, we end up with pretty much the same thing as we did with 5A and B. So it seems to not matter which 5 frames I select. Let me go and give them all to you here. Here's all 3 5-frame sequences. And if I turn before and after on, you can see that they're almost all identical in where they're overexposed and where I have to do recovery. And they all have the same adjustments applied to them. You can see the histogram is the same for all of them. If I do after, you can see they all produce pretty much the same result. And so 5 frames, better than 9 frames, but which 5 frames I choose doesn't seem to make a difference. Then I said, okay, Capture One recommends two stops plus or minus along with your properly exposed frame. So I chose the properly exposed frame, and then I chose the -2, and I chose the +2. So this gives you 1/100th of a second. Yep, that's not the right one. It gives you 1/100th of a second. Sorry. 1/400th of a second, that's 2 stops. And 1/25th of a second, that's 2 stops. So there's exposure, exposure minus 2 stops, exposure plus 2 stops. Merge those together and produced this image. Here's before, exposure warning. You can see this exposure warning looks quite similar to the 5-frame sequence. Here's a 5-frame sequence. You can see they look very similar. What does this really tell us? What this tells us, 5 frames, not better than 3 frames. What we also find is that with 9 frames, actually worse. So 3 frames plus or minus 2 stops, 5 frames, 9 frames. More is not better. We're actually getting the best result with what Capture One recommended as exposure, exposure minus 2 stops, exposure plus 2 stops. So I hope this has been helpful for you. This has certainly been helpful for me in verifying the guidance that Capture One has given us for which frames we should select and how they should be exposed to use the HDR Merge in the new Capture One 22 that was released in December of 2021. Thanks for your time. Hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you find it helpful. Please click the subscribe button. If you have any comments or questions, put them in the comments below. I do my very best to be responsive and always reply to people. And feel free to share the video, share the channel. I appreciate it. And I hope you have a great day. Thanks.